Hi, my name is Maria, and this is my new channel. And I'm 53 years old. I'm married. My husband's a pastor. We have 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren, and an 8th on the way. Sorry, not to be braggy. I've felt like had the idea to do YouTube like a couple years ago, but I just couldn't get behind the idea of, follow me around while I do stuff kind of thing. And then recently I've had 2 different sort of YouTube people say this is the time to start a channel that shares the gospel and points people to Jesus. And that just resonated. I was like, oh, I can do that. And so I've been praying about it, and I just have this sense that I'm supposed to talk with people about their journey and with the Lord and what their life has been like in the process, and the nitty-gritty of the bad and the amazing redemption story, and how Christ just pulls us out of the pit and sets our feet on the rock. And so in order to do that, I realized I need to share my story first, just to set the tone. Now, keep in mind that I've only ever shared these kinds of details once before, about 4 years ago at our church. So it's not like I talk about a lot of these things very often, and most people really don't know about it. It's, testimonies or what we've done in our past is embarrassing. And, there's a lot of just putting on a mask and pretending that you have it all together. And as far as YouTube goes, obviously there's all kinds of people out there, but there's the channels I enjoy the most are the most real people. I don't like scripted ones or really professional ones. I like smaller channels. I like people that are just real. I don't have a stitch of makeup on. And that's what I look like 95% of the time. So I'm not going to put makeup on just to do YouTube. Forget it. No. So, being real. So, I guess to start my story, we'll just back up to before I was born. My parents were both hippies and not really participating in society very much, doing drugs and all that. It was the late 60s, early 70s. I'm born in January of 71. So at some point my dad was in Victoria and he was high, and a girl gave him a tract, and he snarkily said to her, "Don't you have anything better to do?" And she just looked up at him and said, "No, I don't." And then he went back to his hotel room, and when he came down from being high, he reached in his pocket, pulled it out and read it, and describes it as the Holy Spirit just filled him up, and he just believed and was instantly healed of addictions. So he says he went downstairs from this hotel, threw his money and his drugs on the ground, and people scrambled to grab it. And that was it. He started living for Jesus. And I don't know how much longer, not until he met my mom. And my mom was also very lost and had done drugs and all kinds of stuff like that. And neither of them had good families. Anyways, my dad's was worse than my mom's, that's for sure. But they didn't know how to nurture them and help them and all that. So anyways, my mom also got saved and met Jesus somehow at this time. I'm not sure. Anyways, that's my mom's story. So then they met, and then my dad wanted to go to California from Vancouver, BC, Canada, because he knew a pastor there and he wanted him to marry them. So they first got a ride to Portland with my mom's parents, who happened to be going, and then who did not approve of my father at all. He's a total loser, deadbeat, crippled person. My dad got polio when he was 5, so he walked with crutches. They were just thinking, what are you doing tying your cart to this? Anywho, then they got out at Portland, started hitchhiking, and got to California and got married. Had nothing. Literally, my mom got a dress at the thrift store and some commune house through a potluck, and and they got married. And then they, hitchhiked back to Vancouver, and 9 months later I was born in January of 1971. And then my parents were like on welfare. We moved all the time. And eventually, I don't know how many jobs my dad had, but the first one I remember was in the house we lived in Port Coquitlam, where I was in kindergarten in grade 1. And he worked for the highways department in West Vancouver, controlling the lights for the Lionsgate Bridge, which is a 3-lane bridge. So you need someone to control the lights for traffic and for, clearing it for emergency vehicles and such. But that's a really long commute if any of you are familiar with the area. So I would come home from school and my mom would let us have an after-school snack, and then we wouldn't have supper until about 6:30 when my dad would get home. And that's a really long time for a little kid to just have had an apple or whatever since lunchtime. And so my mom was really controlling about food, just because of things in her childhood. And so we weren't just allowed to go get food that we needed. We had to not spoil our dinner. And so I resorted to 2 things. One was I used to go to her purse and steal money and sneak out of the yard and go to the candy store. And I also used to eat the dry dog food out of the garage. So what's kind of sad about that is that when she somehow caught me eating dog food, instead of saying, "Oh my goodness, honey, why are you doing this? Here, let's get you some food. When you're hungry, come tell me," all kinds of responses. I was just told, "You're not allowed to do that." I was not given any grace for how to solve the hunger problem. So that created like quite a lifelong issue with food for me, for sure. So anyways, oh yeah, I forgot. Another thing that I don't remember, but my mom told me, was when I was a toddler, like 1.5-ish, my dad took me to church and made me practice midweek sitting still for an hour so that I would be perfect on Sunday. So what's going on here is my dad's childhood was so epically horrible that when he got saved, he became like a control freak. So everything was his way. Everyone walked on eggshells around him, trying to predict what would make him, go off and try to curb our behavior so that it was acceptable. So we could always hear my dad coming, because with him walking with crutches, we could hear him coming. And so we were always like tidying up how we were playing or what we're doing, try to be as perfect as possible. And so, so that just gives you a little glimpse of that. And then after grade 2, we moved to Vancouver Island, and my dad decided to go into business with his father, which is a very bad idea. And they bought 10 acres just outside of Parksville in a little place called Arrington. And it had a bunch of little cottages on it. And, they mostly could rent them out to people on welfare, like poor people, because they were small and crappy. And we lived there. My grandparents lived there. My dad's brother and his wife lived there. My dad's sister and her 3 kids lived there. My dad's other sister lived there. And then, strangers that they would rent to. They turned one of the buildings into a restaurant that my mom ran, and they turned another one of the buildings into a little corner store that my dad ran. And at that point, we were going to a little Pentecostal church in Parksville, and the Sunday school teacher taught us like the sinner's prayer. And I just remember like every night saying it before I go to sleep, because I wasn't sure that I really was saved. And so I was like around 7 when that happened, just based on grades and age and stuff like that. And I'm the oldest, and I have a younger sister and a younger brother. So my parents worked a lot with these 2 businesses, and our house was just behind the fence where the 2 businesses were, and then we were right close by, but they weren't ever home when we got home and all that from school. So yeah, we were kind of like latchkeys. But anyways, latchkey kids, yeah. One thing that I do remember from that house, a few things. One is I had an LP record that was this little Christian girl named Marcy. And I don't know, I mean, she's almost like a Shirley Temple type character, and super high pitch, like horrible. I'm sure if I were to listen to it now, it would probably give me a headache. But as a little kid, I thought it was the greatest thing to listen to. We didn't have TV. We had, I guess, antennas with like CBC or something, but there's nothing on. So, and even, I'm not sure we had a TV the whole time. But anyways, we didn't have cable or anything. So I'm listening to this record and enjoying it because it's talking about Jesus, and that always gave me peace. And then as time went on, because we lived there for like almost 8 years, as I got older, I had Keith Green and Amy Grant records. And listening to those, wow, like I would actually experience the filling of the Holy Spirit and his presence in the room and get goosebumps and everything, especially from Keith Green's records. And so I've always had like a deep comfort in listening to worship music, because I felt like God was right there with me, more so than when you don't listen to music that's worship music. I'm getting spammed here. So that was interesting. So I don't know, I was quite a talkative little kid. And as a teenager, we had like literally a rotary phone, and it was black, and the receiver was really heavy, and I used to talk on the phone all the time. And eventually, I think in grade 9, I got my own extension phone in my room with like push buttons. Anyway, it's hilarious. So then what happened? Well, in grade 3, I started smoking, which is really bizarre for a little kid. I've thought a lot about it, and the only thing I can think about why I would start smoking at such a young age, which just seems absolutely insane, is that my home life was so intense and caused me so much anxiety. It's like squeezing a slippery bar slope. So as soon as my dad wasn't around, that soap would go jumping to get away with any rule I could possibly break, really. Well, that intensifies as I get older, but yeah. So the other thing, the supply and demand of that, was that at the restaurant when I was like in grade 2, they would pay me $1 or $2 or something to vacuum the restaurant after it's closed. And as each year goes by, I get more and more tasks, like dishwashing, peeling potatoes, making French fries, running the till, doing drinks, learning to do the cooking. Like I literally, by the time I'm 15, can run the restaurant other than ordering food. I don't know how to deal with suppliers. But anyway, so you got to think this is like early 80s. This is a lot of money for a kid, especially when you consider that it had a cigarette vending machine that I had access to, obviously, when I was there by myself vacuuming, and they were 50 cents. Anyways, on top of buying them myself, I even used to steal them from my grandma, who lived next door. And she rolled her own without filters. And the tobacco used to burn my tongue. But anyways, I don't know. It still boggles my mind that I did that. So another thing I did as a kid was I really didn't like my grandpa. Like, he was a very mean and horrible person, and I knew that he had been mean to my dad, although I didn't know the extent of it as much as I do now. And so it actually kind of kept me away from really knowing my grandma, because I didn't spend much time with her, because that means I'd be around him. But one thing I did do was I took a nail and propped it up in the dirt in front of his tire, so when he rolled over it, he got a flat tire. And I don't know why he knew that that was like intentional, but he blamed it on my aunt's daughter, my other cousin, and because she was more like obvious in her misbehaving, and I was more devious. Like, I would do bad things if I knew I could get away with it. But in front facing, I was like a perfect kid. So anyways, she gets punished and it keeps insisting it wasn't me. And finally my aunt asked my dad, like, do you think it was one of your kids? And I'm sure my dad would assume that it would be me and not my younger siblings, because whatever. And I don't know if I confessed. I don't remember. Anyways, I got a spanking for it. And you got to understand what spankings are like at my house. It was a go to my room and wait for me. And that meant go sit on his bed, take your pants off and your underwear and put them around your ankles, and then sit on there waiting for him to come. He comes in, sits down, takes off his belt, folds it in half and goes, it's like it makes this crack noise. And then you have to lay on the bed, and then he starts beating you. And usually you get like three whips or so, and you're not allowed to put your hands over your bum. Then you'll get more if you do that. Anyways, I don't know if it might have been this time, but I don't know for sure. But because I did get extra because she had been punished, but I don't know if this was the time. But one of them, he just lost it and didn't stop. And I knew that I wasn't supposed to be getting 6, 7, whatever hits. So I just crawled away and got away from him. I'm pretty sure that was my last spanking. Anyways, so my dad was quite a harsh disciplinarian. He controlled the family. I was never told, that they loved me by neither my mom nor my dad. They never cuddled us. They never hugged us. They never kissed us. My sister needed that, and she would go get it from them before bed. And my brother and I would hang back and just ridicule her and say, like, what a suck. Because that's kind of what my parents thought. So then that rubbed off on us. Anyways, it's ridiculous. I mean, I turned into a mom that like mauled my kids with hugs and kisses because I never wanted them to think that they weren't loved. It's a pendulum swinging, right? So anyway, very harsh father, taking us to church, putting on his, his tie and trying to be a good businessman and be accepted, but doesn't know how to control his anger, doesn't know how to not be so controlling of his family because he's so afraid of chaos that he's a control freak. Now, one of the things that is super good about that is I was never allowed to babysit like a normal kid. And I hated it at the time, but now I look back on it and I'm quite thankful. And he explained, he said, no, when people get a babysitter, all their friends know that they're gone and they know that you're there and they could come over and do whatever they want to you. And also the dad might come home drunk and something might happen. Like, no, you're not doing that. And plus you can just work for us and you don't need that kind of money. And it was true, but I just wanted to be able to do it because it was like normal. So then in grade 6, we started going to this ACE Christian school that was attached to the church we were going to. And if anyone doesn't know about ACE, it's some very strict sort of American curriculum. And you have this little flag system and you sit in cubicles and you just work by yourself. And then you put up a flag when you need to use the washroom or if you need something marked or if you have a question. And you get demerits if you're misbehaved, and you get, I guess, merits if you do your homework and you memorize all your scripture verses and all that. Well, I was like the best behaved kid at that school. And I always did all my homework and I never got demerits and all that type of stuff. And then one day, I had some sort of altercation with a girl at school, and so the principal's wife wanted to talk with the two of us after. So we went into a classroom and talked, and it was really obvious right away that the principal's wife was not listening to what happened. She wasn't hearing my side. She was just totally taking the other girl's side. So I just stood up and I said, my dad doesn't know why I'm not coming out. My siblings are already waiting in the car for me with him, so and you're not being fair and you're not listening to me, so I'm just going to go. And so I left, which is not cool. Now, this was also a school of corporal punishment. Now, I'd never received it because I was always well behaved, but the deal was that the school would phone the parents, discuss it, and then if needed and if approved, the child would receive the corporal punishment the following day. So when I got in the car, I explained what happened. My dad said, okay, well, I'm sure they'll call and we can talk about it. No call ever came. So the next morning we drive to school and the principal comes out and meets our car. And my dad says, oh, I was expecting a call from you, but none came. He goes, yeah, well, we've decided that Maria is going to be suspended for the rest of the school year. And I was just like, what? And my dad was shocked and he goes, oh, okay, and says to my siblings, off you go. And then the principal says, oh, no, we've decided if one child in a family is suspended, then they all are. And I'm 12 years old. And like, I don't know a lot, but I know that's wrong. And they're just completely making it up. And I was just dumbfounded. Like, what is going on? So my dad was just like, okay, didn't make a scene or anything, just drove away. And I'm crying and so upset and so embarrassed. And I feel bad for my siblings. And I'm just like, what is going on? My dad just kept saying, oh, you just get an extra 2 weeks of summer. Don't worry about it. And it's not what you did. They were trying to get rid of me and I wasn't taking the hints, so they had to hurt my kids. So the background on that is that I was allowed to do a sleepover at that school with the girls in my grade or the girls around my age. And so my dad had asked me, what did you guys do? So I explained something like, and I'm just completely naive. My dad tells me this later when I'm older, that, after we got into our pajamas and that, then we were in the gymnasium and the principal was like flying us like airplanes around, like by your ankle and your arm, or maybe just your ankles. I don't remember. But anyways, it was inappropriate. And we were like, I was in my nightie and I didn't even know that was inappropriate. And it didn't feel weird at the time, but to my dad, it was very weird when I recalled what happened. And so he also saw some other things as well from that person that he wasn't liking, that looked pedophilia-ish. And so he was causing problems, so they were trying to get rid of him. So they kicked us out. So I got kicked out of school, even though I was a good kid. So that was interesting. And then right around this time, that year, I also stopped smoking, because in grade 6, I really started smoking a lot. But by grade 7, I stopped because I got really serious about figure skating. And that was a real blessing. I'm very thankful for God for like having that cross my path, because it got me out of trouble, like no more smoking. And it got me so hyper focused on something that was super good for me to get my energy out and do something that I was good at and have a separate identity from my family. And it also gave me a lot of confidence. So that was really great. I'm very thankful for that. And one day in grade 7, so the next year after the school thing, after I had skating after school, and then I got a ride home from a neighbor. Often I had to get rides because my parents are working all the time. And luckily where I lived was kind of like en route to where lots of other people lived, so they could drive me. But anyways, then I walk into the store to see my dad, but he's not behind the counter. And that had never happened before. And it was like one of our neighbors' brother was there. And I was like, where's my dad? And he's like, oh, you need to go talk to him. He's at the house. So I go down to the house and he's crying. And I'm like, ooh, I've pretty much never seen my dad cry. So I'm like totally in shock. And he said, your sister was hit by a car and your mom went in the ambulance with her down to Victoria, and I don't know what to do. And I was just like, wow. Okay. I said, well, we need to pack up stuff and drive down there and go see them. And he's like, okay. So I quickly phone my coach, tell her like, this is happening, all that. And I go pack up stuff for my mom, my brother, my dad, me. I don't know if I got stuff for my sister. I don't remember. And then we get in the car, and then my dad can't really drive. Like, he did the pedals and I did the steering, because he was so distracted and distraught that he was just like veering off the side of the road. And it's like, back then it was like a 2.5, 3-hour drive kind of thing. So miraculously we made it, thank goodness. And my sister was in a coma. She was very, very brain damaged, and she ended up like being in a coma for over 2 weeks and then in the hospital for over a year. She had to learn how to talk and eat and walk and everything all over again. And then when she came home, like my mom, like couldn't leave her alone. And she was just my mom was kind of a basket case. Or not really, but just overwhelmed, right? Not basket case, sorry. And then, so she just really couldn't work at the restaurant anymore. And so my parents sold it. And she was looking after my sister and taking her like all these speech therapy appointments and physical therapy appointments and, just being a chauffeur of a very, very head injured little girl. And so then my dad wasn't making enough money at the corner store without my mom running the restaurant. And so he ended up going back to the old job that he had in West Vancouver. And so he did it something like 6 days on, 4 days off kind of a thing. And he lived in the back of his truck camper and all that. So he did that from I don't know, probably all summer through till Christmas. And during that summer while he was gone, I went to summer camp to become like a counselor and training course I was in. And while I was there, my friend, who was a year older than me, told me that the youth leader from the youth group that we were going to, which was a different church than where my parents went, because they didn't have a youth group, so I had to go to a different church's youth group. He had stolen her innocence, and he was like a pedophile and sleeping with her. And I don't remember like if I asked her permission or anything. I'm not sure. I just knew it was wrong, and I just got up and went and told the director of the camp. And to my horror, the gossip was that not only did the church fire him and kick him out, they kicked her out of the church. And she's like an innocent kid. Like, I don't understand that. Anyway, so at this point, I've basically just survived 2 pedophiles, right? And mostly because my dad's really controlling. So it turned out that in that sense, that was a blessing. And I am very thankful. And it's interesting how you can see, the brokenness of my dad and how he didn't know how to love his kids or how to be gentle with them or how to show them affection, because he never experienced any of those things. And he wasn't pursuing healing with the Lord on his past, so he was just coping, right? And so even though he caused us some damage as kids, for sure, he also protected us too from these other potentially damaging situations. So yeah, I'm super thankful for that. So then that Christmas, he comes home after, doing this commute thing for 6 months. He's like, that's it, we got to move. And so this is like 1987. And if any of you are old enough to know, but in Canada, there was this huge interest rate problem, and interest rates on mortgages were 20%, which is like a credit card. So everybody was going bankrupt and losing their houses. And so when we go to sell this property with these houses and this restaurant and the store, and it was 10 acres, they got nothing for it. And so I think they walked away from that 8 years of investment and all of that with $10,000 from what they paid for it. It was just horrific. So we were very poor, and we lived in low-income housing in North Vancouver. And it was like a little apartment. I remember telling my parents, I am not moving. It was halfway through grade 10, so just a nightmare time to move. I'm not moving, and you're moving us into a 3-bedroom. I am not sharing a room with my sister, and I had a brother, so you can't share with him. So my parents, I guess they felt bad, so they put up, I got the master bedroom in this house, and they put up bookcases in the living room and sort of had to crawl into their bed where there was a curtain where one bookcase was missing from the little L that they made, and they had this. Anyways, moving was so hard. It was absolutely horrific. My dad picked a church that was awful. The youth group there was awful. I hated that church. I had to quit skating because my parents had no money. I moved halfway through the year, so it's like everybody sort of already has their friend group, so like nobody would talk to me. And then the only people that really did were, we called them bangers then, but they were like the skippers and the smokers. So I go back to smoking and skipping, and unbelievable. So then over that summer after grade 10, I was working and I figured out how to play the game of high school and what the right clothes are to wear, and bought all that stuff. Because up until this point, I pretty much shopped at the thrift store when I lived on the island, and I didn't care, and I was mostly just a jock, so I was, you know, into that and not into clothes and not into boys. So I figured out how to play the game by the beginning in grade 11. And everybody would say, "What, you were here last year?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I was invisible, I know." Anyways, problem was that, well, first off, high school sucks, and people are horrible, and this false narrative where you can only be friends with people in your grade is, I don't have any friends exactly my age now as an adult. It's so fake. Anyways, one of the other things is that girls really weren't that nice to me because I was just like competition. And so the main people that were nice to me were boys. And that got me into a whole heck of a lot of trouble. On a side note, like academically, I was a really good student when I lived on the island. And when I moved to Norfan, the only class I struggled in ever was French. And in BC, they don't really value French, and I had bad teachers and whatever, so I'm not going to really blame myself. But when I came to Norfan, I'm in Algebra 10, and I asked a question that was, I don't remember it, but it was so basic. The teacher thought that I was like one of these jokester kids that was like trying to cause trouble by asking such a stupid question, and he sent me out of the classroom. And so when I got home, I told my dad that, and my dad actually went to school and talked to the teacher, which he like never did stuff like that. He wasn't really involved in, you know, I think he watched me skate once in my life. And anyway, so he comes to my school and explains to my teacher, like, no, Maria's not a problem kid. She's actually lost. And the teacher was like, oh, okay, well, she has to come in early for morning tutoring, and she needs a tutor herself. You're gonna have to pay for that. And that was just how far behind like different school districts can be. So here I was, like this kid who, you know, basically was a famous figure skater in a small town and did really good academically, moved to the city, and I'm lost in math. And I really wanted to take French, even though that I had struggled with that, because back then to go to university, you had to have a second language. And I walk into French class, and it was like they were all in university. Their level of French was unbelievable. So I was like, that's not going to happen. So yeah, really struggling academically, have no friends, don't have the right clothes. Like, it was just awful. Go have a horrible church, no youth group. Yeah. So grade 11 happens, and then I'm just getting all this attention from boys. So I started dating. And sadly, like, what do they want to do? Well, they want to sleep with you. And I broke up with my boyfriend. I was like, no, I don't do that. And he was like, oh, okay. That's fine. We can still go out. But of course that actually ends up happening. And what is so horrible about that is that I was never taught by any of these youth groups or my parents or anyone or any church service that all I was really taught was kind of like the purity culture. Like, this is something precious and you save it for your husband. And basically, if you don't save it for your husband, then you're worthless and you're like a piece of crap, was basically what I believed. So all of a sudden I'm in this worthless category. And boy, did Satan jump on that. I mean, it's heartbreaking to me now thinking about it, how badly we don't equip kids in this area of knowing that, like, Jesus died for sin, but it's not the end of your life, and you're not worthless now. You just have to repent and confess and don't do it again, like, and start over, you know, like a reset button kind of thing. But I was never taught that, and so Satan just swooped in, and boy, did I ever have low self-esteem and felt like crap. And at this point, I'm like sneaking out of my room to go literally steal my mom's car and go to parties and do all those kinds of things. And thank goodness that, I don't know, every time I would drink in the middle of a field at a party or whatever, I would throw up. And so it really had not much appeal to me. The hooking up with people, that continued, unfortunately. A few times I tried marijuana and that did not go well. So I didn't really get sucked into like drugs and alcohol. And I think that's just the grace of God just blocking that for me. That must be what it was, like, honestly, when I look back on that. So somehow I survived grade 11, and I find another youth group to go to because mine was horrible. And I end up being like a little small group leader of a bunch of girls, and we would, and that was lovely, trying to encourage them and hope they don't go down the path I went down to. But I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but somehow in grade 12, God just kind of spoke to me like, this is not the path I have for you. And so, yeah, I felt convicted, like I have to break up with my boyfriend and tell him I can't go out with you anymore because I can't have sex with people, and here's a Bible, I can't go out with you because you're not a Christian. I mean, it was like super cheesy, but it's literally what I did. And we ended up still going to grad together just as friends because I was not going to be dating. Like, I was done with boys, let me tell you. And just suck the garbage trucks here. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Well, anyway. Wow, it's like 35 degrees out, and those poor guys have like polyester high-vis shirts on. Oh. Wow. All right, so where was I? Yeah, grade 12, break up with a boyfriend, still go to grad. My parents came to the grad dinner, and then I asked them, can I go to the after party? And my dad said no. And so when I was getting a ride home with another couple, and one of them, somebody was driving, not me, and I said, guys, I can't go to the party, you got to drive me home, like I have to go home. And so you got to understand, I had a midnight curfew, and by now I've like cleaned up my act, I've stopped wearing a mask, and I'm no longer, sneaking out of my room, stealing a car, drinking, sleeping around, whatever. I'm not doing any of those things, and I'm actually like on the straight and narrow kind of thing, trying to see what God has for me. And so we pull up, and it's not yet midnight, and there's all these black garbage bags on the front lawn. And I knew right away, my dad threw all my stuff out. I knew it. And so I don't know if I told my friend. I don't remember what conversation I had with him, but I just knew I had to get in there. So I come in, and he says, oh, you're here. I was expecting that you were not going to make it home by curfew, so I put all your stuff out on the lawn. And I can't even tell you how thankful I am that the Holy Spirit said, like, don't go be normal and go to after grad party like all the other grads are doing. Like, go home, because otherwise I would have been homeless that day. So now I'm praying, okay, Lord, I really need Christian friends. I don't have any. And so I go to college, and I took business administration and marketing, and I took an accelerated program. So I was like really busy, and there's no spares, and it's just like from 8 till 5 every day. And it was very busy. And there was a poster on the wall for a Christian club on Tuesdays. And I went, and there's 60 people in the room. I couldn't even believe it. I was so excited. And it was awesome because they had like a calendar with events and Bible studies and outings and all that. And it was so great because it fit with my don't spend time alone with guys program that I was on. So then I could just hang out in groups with all these people. And that was really great. And I ended up, I'm trying to remember if it's first or second year. Yeah. Then something interesting happened that summer, because my college was 2 years. That summer I got a job with the rec commission doing like summer day camp. And it's a very sought after job, and they, have hundreds of applicants, and they hire like 20 people. But I got hired because I was already worked for them teaching skating and doing ice patrol. And that's what paid for me to go through college and all that and have a car and whatever. But then I felt like God told me to go work at this summer camp that hardly pays anything. And it was associated with that little youth group where I was like the little leader of the small group of the girls and all that. And basically that group was kind of a follow-up to the summer camp program. And so, I applied for the camp and I got it, and it paid hardly anything. And I said, well, God, I can't give up the other job and take this one unless you like figure out how to make up the difference. Like, how am I gonna pay for school and, all that. So back then we didn't have internet. So there was like these student job offices, and you go down there and there's like bulletin boards and little computers that aren't hooked up to the internet, but they just have, I don't know, a spreadsheet with jobs that were entered on them, whatever. Anyways, I see this one poster on the board that says, day laborer needed, car, must have car. I rip off the little phone number, go home. No cell phone, you got to wait till you get home. Phone. Gives me the address, show up tomorrow at, 7 a.m. And I go there, and there's like, I don't know, 20 people that he's hired in this big mansion on the hill in this really prestigious area in West Van. And, he gets all the kids to like clean up garbage and from all the trades and whatever. And there's only a couple girls, and he has us do like nitpicky things, like scrape labels off of windows and off of baseboard heaters, and like picky things that you want someone that's like more careful. And then the next day he keeps like 4 people and me, and the next day he keeps two of us. And then he after I did like taping off of tile with paper, or all these different things to protect things from the next trade or whatever. Eventually the main job was actually caulking baseboards and moldings, and it had literally, I kid you not, baseboards and crown moldings even in the closets. So what it was the house of the owner of the construction company, but they normally built high rises. They didn't normally do residential. So the guy was absolutely loaded. So this house was crazy. Anyways, the foreman guy of the job, like, he protected me. He told all the guys on the site, like, don't bug her, don't, make lewd comments, all that. It was awesome. If he wasn't like that, then I wouldn't have stayed. But he told them all to behave. And then he gave me a key, actually, because I could stay longer, which, wow, I can't even believe I was in a house by myself. But anyways, it sounds risky, doesn't it? But it's the 80s, late 80s. And so I'm just doing all this caulking and molding and trimming everywhere, and I've got like barely no skin on my fingers. But anyways, I made more money in like, I don't know what it was, 4 weeks, something like that, than I did the whole rest of the summer. And so God made up the difference. And so I gave my notice for the day job, and they were not happy. But anyways, I just love it how many times, like, when God tells you to do something and it doesn't look like it's going to work, but then he makes a way for it to work. And so I worked at this summer camp, and that was really good for me. No dating, all that was great. And then that next fall, come back to school for my second year college, and be in my friend group with the Christian club. And then that's when who became my husband walked in. And I thought, oh, like, he's super cute, but hi, welcome, hand him the monthly calendar, whatever. And I don't remember him ever coming to any of our events. I mean, it turns out like he didn't have a car, and a lot of them were like kind of car related. But what did happen was a month or so later, he started coming to the same church as me, the church I hated. And, I'd asked my dad, can I please go to a different church? He's like, no, we have to go to church together as a family, because my dad's all about like the appearance, right? And anyways, I also saw who was going to be my husband around campus all the time, talking to people I knew from the summer camp, because he grew up in Gibson's, and the summer camp was on Keats Island, which is right across the water from Gibson. So a lot of our staff was actually from Gibson's. And so then he started coming to our church, and I just like completely avoided him. Like, actually went out of my way to not meet him. My friends would be like, hey, have you met him? I'm like, no. Oh, come meet him. He's so nice. I'm like, no, I don't want to. Like, I literally said that to one friend. And then this is like in September, October-ish. And then by January, my mom asked me, hey, have you ever talked to that tall blonde fellow that stands in front of us? And I said, no. And she goes, oh, you should. He's so nice. I'm like, Mom, seriously. And then my dad yells from the other room, like, leave her alone. I said, thanks, Dad. And then the very next week after the service, like, I'm coming in a door, he's going out that same door, and there's like 4 in a row, plus there's doors at another side of the building. Like, we walk, kind of into each other. And he shakes my hand, he introduces himself, and right away, God was like this, like a brick. Maria, this guy's different. And wow, he really was. Right away, his voice just felt super like familiar, even though we hadn't really met. And we just start talking about all the people that we know in common and how that is. And then he asked me, are you going to the Michael Green lecture tonight, which was at a local rec center. And Michael Green wrote a book, and he was like a teacher at a Christian theology school. And I paused, and I had talked about it going with my mom and my sister, but it was really based on how much homework I had. So I said, well, I plan to go if I can finish my homework. And he goes, okay, well, maybe I'll see you there. And so then we did see each other there. We sat together, and then we, just found out like more and more just about how he didn't like this church. I didn't like this church, things like that. Had lots in common. Now this year, the church started having a youth group, and so I stopped going to the other one. Funny enough, because there was another sort of pedophile situation with one of the leaders, not involving me, but I could see it with somebody else. So I was like, I just don't want to be involved in this. Why are there pedophiles everywhere? I don't know. Then, so now I'm helping out as sort of like a college intern at the crappy church that has a few kids in it. And the leaders are horrible. They're actually appointed by the pastor. They had no desire to do it. They didn't even like kids. And so Earl started coming and being there. And I remember one time being at the park, and 2 girls had an argument. So I was sitting on the bench talking them through it. And the real leader comes over, and she's like, why are they talking to you and not me? And I'm like, can we talk about this later? Because, obviously teenagers go to the people that they trust. They're not going to just go to somebody because they're the official leader. Anyways, the last time we ever went to a Friday youth group was when those leaders announced to the kids, well, we're going to switch from weekly meetings to every other week because over this past year, we haven't seen any growth in you. Oh, that just broke my heart. Like, you don't talk to people like that. And it's just the most, the opposite thing to say. If you think they're not growing, then maybe you need to spend more time with them. I didn't get it. So Earl and he picked up on that right away too. And we just went around the circle and said something positive about each kid in the room and things that we had noticed about them and their personality or things they had done, or just trying to encourage them, because this is just horrific. And this is the fall of 1990. And then at this point, we were going to get married on December 14th, or 1991, because we got married December 14th, 1991. So my parents had stopped coming to that church in the mornings, on Sunday mornings, and they found another church to go to. And we said, well, we kind of just need to keep going because we're getting married here. And like, it felt like too hard to phone everybody or track everybody down that we invited to like change a venue. And so we just kind of wrote it out. But this one Sunday, we decided, well, we'll go with my parents because they were just raving about this new church they found. And then we'll go to the evening service, which my parents were still doing. It was more of a outreach type of service. Anyhow, on the way home, so we actually went to this vineyard church in Vancouver, and it was kind of what we needed at the time. It was very healing. They focused on worship a lot, and we just cried. Like this church we'd been in was so abusive. It was ridiculous. And so it, experienced the Holy Spirit and just started healing. And on the way home from that Sunday service, we actually got in a car accident and somebody rear-ended us, and I was looking over my shoulder. So my neck took the brunt of that, and I couldn't go to the service that night. And this is another like total hand of God. Sometimes he answers your prayers in a tornado. Sometimes he answers it with a car accident. Like, this is crazy. But I was like on a board or something that was sloped up onto the couch with my feet up and my back I was trying to find some sort of position that wouldn't hurt. It hurt so bad. And I probably should have gone to the hospital, but that didn't happen. So the rest of my family and Earl went to that evening service. And what happened that night is the reason why I know that God arranged that for me not to be there. Because the senior pastor did an altar call for people with asthma, and Earl had always battled with asthma, so he went up there. And then this guy's like trying to make him raise his hands, and Earl's not really good at being bossed around, so he's like, no, I'm not raising my hands. And this goes on for a while, and he won't relent. And I think he keeps on down the line, gets everybody to raise their hands, and he comes back, and Earl's still not doing it. And so then he figures it out, and he goes, well, will you raise your hand for Jesus? And Earl said, yeah. So then he did. Then the guy lunges across the stage, because this is an altar call, and points out my dad and starts yelling at him and saying a whole bunch of horrible things. I don't know, I wasn't there, but it was awful. And so they come home and try to debrief that and explain it to me, and I'm just like, what is going on? And you got to think, like, the Friday night was that we're going to go to every other week, and now this Sunday night he's somehow attacking my dad and making a spectacle of Earl. And so my dad phones and sets up a meeting with the pastor and his wife and Earl and I and him and my mom. So the 6 of us are in this meeting. And I'm wearing like one of those whiplash collars. And it's hard to even fathom what happened in that meeting. But they started with bringing out things that they had against us. And the first thing I can remember was they said my mom had counseled a woman incorrectly in the nursery. And so what had happened was that this woman's husband would no longer come to the church. And that happened a lot. There's way more women in the church than men. And so my mom said, oh, well, is he willing to still go to a church? And she said, yeah. And my mom says, well, then you should go to a different church with him. And so they were just horrified. How dare you give that kind of counsel? That's not the counsel we were giving, da 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 da. So we're all just like, okay, next. And then I don't even know how it came out, but they're like pro-abortion, and they had counseled all these women to have abortions in the church. And we were just like absolutely horrified. Like Earl had done a rally in his high school against abortion. Like, this is not cool. I can't even believe that they're even bringing this up. Like, it just was like nails in the coffin of this place being a place of death. And then they brought up the Friday night and how we had gone against the leadership and, sort of ridiculed them. Yeah, by blessing kids when they just got slimed. Yeah, right. So anyways, I was just bawling listening to this whole dynamic go on. And Earl and my mom were more arguing with them. My dad hardly said anything. So we left from there, and like they asked us, please don't come back to this church. And so we got kicked out of a cult. Wow, that is amazing. But I was also thrilled because I hated that church. So a few weeks later, our wedding happens. Not one person from the church comes. Earl was commuting in Vancouver and taking buses, and like people from the church would get on his bus and then get off and go to the next bus, like avoiding him and stuff. And like, we didn't do anything, but we got completely shunned. Anyways, yeah, it's just wild. So then we were in this Vineyard church, and it was good for a time. Like, honestly, it was. And there's some lovely people there. But I can tell you that the test of time has not done well for the fruit of that place. And what I've gathered from my, just bird's eye view looking back is that they really focus on worship. And it's almost like teaching the Bible and the Word is the appetizer, but the main meal is the worship and experiencing the Holy Spirit. And believe me, I love worship. And I told you, like, it meant a lot to me as a kid. And I definitely experienced the Holy Spirit, and it's powerful. But the real way in which God changes us is actually through His Word. That's His instruction book for us. And so there's not one person from our generation from that church that's still married. Like, we're the only people that are still married. Oh, sorry, there might be one other couple, but they're not Christian anymore. Yeah. So many people, most have fallen away and or been divorced and so on and so forth. So not a lot of good fruit out of that. So that's very sad. Anyways, so I was a month away from being 21 when I got married. And that's pretty young. I never, ever lived on my own. I had a midnight curfew till the day I got married. There was 2 times when I did get locked out. And one of them, by then it was, I wasn't sneaking out. I was blatantly out with my youth group Christian friends from college and doing a Bible study or an event or a movie night or something. Like, I was not partying or being bad at all. And so I didn't make curfew. And so I banged on my brother's window to let me in. And then my dad told me the next day, like, no, if you don't get to do that. If you miss curfew, you cannot stay here and you have to move out. But this will be like your warning kind of thing. And so the next time it happened, I foolishly got a ride with a friend because it was a movie night up on this hill where there's really bad parking. And so, hey, can you give me a ride? And I live at the bottom of the hill, so it was like easy. And then foolishly, I did not get a ride home with her. I let this other guy give me a ride home who I knew had a crush on me. It's a very bad idea. And I didn't take my keys with me for some reason. Well, the movie was late, or him driving me home was late. I don't know. I got there at like 10 after 12. And I knew right away I was locked out because the light was off. But I did not tell him because I knew he cannot rescue me from this, because that will create a bond that I do not want to have with this person. So I don't know how I had the wisdom to know that. Honestly, I do not know. No one ever taught me that. I guess that was the Holy Spirit. He drives away. This is the kind of douche he is. Don't you stay and make sure the person gets in the house? I still do that to my friends that are adults. I wait and make sure they're in. Nope, he drives away. Yes, he is an idiot. So I'm stranded. I'm not allowed to knock on the windows or the doors. I'm not allowed to get in. There's my car sitting there, but I don't have my keys. And this is like 1990, and there's no cell phones. So I got to walk like 2 kilometers. And I don't know if I had a quarter. I must have. Place a phone call. Now I'm having to decide, who am I going to call? And again, I could call an ex-boyfriend who's probably awake, or I could call my girlfriend and wake up her whole family. And I'm like, I'm going to call my girlfriend because I'm not playing with fire with this whole guy thing. So she comes and gets me, and I stay the night, and then drives me home in the morning, and my dad sits me down and says, like, you can't live here unless you promise you will never do this again, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm in business, and I know about math, and I'm like, I don't want to go into loans. I don't know where I would go. I don't have a big savings account I just am, I have enough to pay for my car and school, and not really prepared to move out yet. I'm like 19, whatever. So I say, oh, I promise, I'll make it home. I'm sorry, begging to be able to stay there. So I missed a really big story in the summer between grade 12 and college. And this is very significant because we know that Satan is prowling around like a lion ready to destroy. And he knows how to target each person based on their weaknesses. And so, I don't know what your weaknesses are, like sex, money, power, food, sugar, fame, possessions, holidays. I have no idea. Everyone has different things. And so in that summer between grade 12, after I've already, survived homelessness because I didn't go to the grad party, I'd broken up with my boyfriend, prayed for Christian friends, didn't have them yet. My old friends from the island come and hang out with me. In fact, one of my friends comes and lives with me in my room because she's trying to leave the island and I live in the city, and so I get her a job being a lifeguard at for the rec commission because I work for them too. And anyways, and then she's a friend from that Christian private school that I went to in grade 6. And one of the other friend that we had in common was this guy, and I'd always had a crush on him, but he always had a crush on her. So of course, like, who in the world could possibly get me back into the lifestyle that Satan wants me to have but this person? Like, when I look at it, I don't think anybody else would have worked because I was already determined not to be doing that. But yet he brings someone that I have this, like, I guess a sentimental crush. I'm not even sure what to call it, but whatever. And so sure enough, I go with them back to the island at some point, and I end up going back to my old ways with this person. And again, this is one of the most impactful moments that I had in my life with God, because I basically had like an out-of-body experience where I wasn't really there. And I hadn't taken any substances or anything. It wasn't like that. It was completely spiritual. God kind of removed me from the situation, and he just spoke to me. And he said, Maria, what are you doing? This is not what I have for you. And yeah, that was epic. And then the thing that happened was that he then moved to North Van from the island and tried to like guilt me into marrying him and saying, well, we're Christians, so we shouldn't do that. And because you have to marry me. Wow. Well, I don't know where it came from, but I think it's because God said, this is not what I have for you, that I felt very sure in knowing that I was not supposed to build the rest of my life on this mistake. Like, this is not the person that you're supposed to build your life with that would be willing to do that with you before you're married. No. And can you imagine how many girls have been encouraged to marry someone that they slept with? Probably millions. And it blows my mind. And certainly being pressured into marrying someone that you're having a baby with, which I completely am pro-life and think you should have the baby, but I don't think you should tie the rest of your life to someone who's willing to do that with you when they're not in a position, you're not in the right position to do that. I mean, maybe for some people it works out, sure, but obviously for lots it doesn't when you look at our divorce rate and so on and so forth. Whew, so thankful that God was clear with me about that. Sorry, there's wind and it's making my door flap, but it's very hot and the air conditioning doesn't really work up here, so I rely on wind to survive. Yeah. So I'm just about not quite 21 when I get married, and just after I turn 23, we have our first baby. So just slightly 2 years later. And And then when he's 11 months old, I get pregnant again. And this time I haven't had a cycle, so I don't know how pregnant I am, but I knew I was pregnant. And so I went to a walk-in clinic to do like a free pee test because I was so poor I couldn't even buy like a pregnancy test. And they do it for free at the walk-in. And they say, wow, you're really pregnant. And we don't have any dates to go on, so we're going to send you for an ultrasound. And then on the way out of the appointment, I see this woman with like identical twins. And I said, oh, twins. And she just kind of looks at me like, yeah, no kidding. Like they're dressed the same and everything. But it was the first time in my life that I ever thought, I wonder if I'm having twins. Like I've never thought that ever. I never wanted twins. So many people have told me that they had hoped for them, but I literally had never thought about it. And the next day I go for the ultrasound, and Earl's at work. It's just a dating ultrasound. It's not like, let's see the baby. It's like, I'm way at the beginning. And the technician's like, whoa. I'm like, what? Did I not have enough water in my bladder? Like, what's going on? And he's like, just lay back and relax. And he starts asking me things like, how stressed out do you get? And stuff like that. He's trying to gauge my reaction. And then he turns him on and he goes, well, how do you feel about having twins? And I literally sat up and I said, oh my God, how cool. And so he prints out the little thing, and there's like 2 little sacks and these little peanuts. And I was already 11 weeks. And so I drive to my husband's work and I hand him the little ultrasound. And I said, here you go. And he's like, what is this? Are those like 2 eyes? Is that an elbow? Like, what am I looking at here? I said, read the words. He's like, what words? And it says twin A, twin B. And you got to think, like, he's 24 and he's about to have 3 children. And he just kind of collapsed on the counter. He worked at Mountain Equipment Co-op. And he was behind like the sunglasses counter or something like that. He just kind of collapsed in overwhelmment. I mean, he was happy because we think kids are a blessing, but he was also very overwhelmed with the responsibility of it. And I hadn't gone back to work after I had had our first child. And so now I'm not going to be able to go back to work. Just now I'm pregnant with twins and they're coming very soon. And so sure enough, they're born, and our oldest is only 20 months old, and we have 3 kids under 2. And can you imagine 3 kids in diapers? Like, it's just a blur. So anyways, while I was pregnant, we moved in to a multi-family house with my parents. And they lived in the middle. We lived on the top, and another family from church lived in the basement. And yes, it helped us financially, but it was very hard, like emotionally, relationally. My mom didn't really have very good boundaries. And the first thing we did was Earl installed a door because it didn't have a door at the top of the stairs. And my mom would just knock and open the door. And so then we put a chain on that door. And then she'd go knock, and the wood would get eaten away from the chain. So we put a sign up that said, please knock and await response. Because, I'm like 24 years old and I've never really stood up to my parents, and I don't know how to tell them, like, Mom, you can't just barge in on us, and you can't just come up here every 10 minutes or bring us food so that's your excuse to see the grandkids or whatever she was trying to do, So yeah, and then when the twins are born in September 95, so in the summer of 97, my parents go on a big vacation, and that was lovely. But when they came back, then it really hit me, the difference in how much meddling and all of that happened. And I just came upstairs after my mom was asking me, like, where are you going? What are you doing? Da, da, da. And I said, we got to move. And so we moved out to Abbotsford with the people from the basement, and we shared a house, but that was really hard. It was I think we moved in the summer, and that September, the twins turned 2, and I slipped into a deep depression, like not get out of bed, not shower, not answer the phone, like not coping. Like, it was brutal. And we were like so poor, we're eating Kraft dinner, which is like really bad. We had blankets on the windows because single pane, and it was a really cold winter, and there's too much cold coming in, and so hardly any sunlight's coming in. And I mean, it was just a gong show on like so many levels. And Earl was at this point, he was in school to become a teacher because he had finished working at Mount Winnicott Co-op and decided to do that. But now I'm falling apart. And luckily his school was remote mostly, other than driving into the city for the tests. So he was able to kind of juggle it. But then I phoned my friend and said, like, I think I'm really depressed, or I think something's wrong. And I explained all my symptoms. She goes, oh no, you're super depressed. You have to go to the doctor. You need antidepressants. And I want to pay for some counseling for you. Well, how does one unpack the childhood that I had in a couple sessions? Like, it's taken years for God to heal the things. And I wouldn't say I'm fully healed. I don't know if that's possible, but like I'm way more healed than I was back then. So then we realized like this isn't sustainable living out here. We're barely going to church because we got 3 little toddlers. You know, so Earl says, well, let's move like to my hometown where he's from, on the Sunshine Coast, and his parents live there. And so we move there and we start going to the church that he got saved in as a teenager. It was a little Baptist church. It was so dry and dusty. Coming from Vineyard to Baptist, I was like, God, how can I do this? This is awful. And this is when he taught me the idea of panning for gold. He said, you're going to have sermons that are gravel in your mouth. You're going to have conversations with people that are like gravel in your mouth. But then every once in a while, you're going to have conversations like a piece of gold. So just pan for gold. And so that's what I did. Then it turned out like the pastor had a pornography problem, and so the whole church kind of imploded, and most of our friends left and went to the next town up to a Calvary chapel. And we didn't. For some reason, we went to the Salvation Army in that town because the people that ran the army were on our street, and our daughters were friends, and the wife and I ran a brownies group together, and so it was like a relational decision. And then they got transferred to Prince George. And so we thought, oh, hey, let's go with them, because at this point, like, Earl knew that he was called to be a pastor, and he was trying to figure out how to make that happen. And so we thought, well, if we go to training school with the Salvation Army, that's in Winnipeg, and at least Prince George is cold too, and we'd always live on the south coast and not even been around snow. So we sold our place. We showed it once, and it got full asking price with no subjects. So we come home, and like, you can't even back out of that. So we went to Prince George, and then they offered me like to be the executive assistant for the whole unit. So then I saw like the inner workings of finances and all that. And so after a year and a half, I just said to my husband, I'm like, the Salvation Army is not a good fit for us. Like, they fund their churches by having thrift stores, which means the pastor is an employer, and you're going to hate that. So we packed up and headed back down to the Sunshine Coast, and this is, I think, 2007, and during that while we were gone, all the housing prices doubled. So we could not afford to get back in, and we were just renters then for literally 18 years. It wasn't until this March that somehow God made it possible for us to be able to buy a house again in Winnipeg. Big difference. So that first Sunday that we were back, we went to his parents' church, and it was a little Baptist church. And we sit down, us and our 3 kids, and they're teenagers, like grade 8 and grade 9 kind of thing. Or grade 7 and grade 8 maybe. And then these people come up to us and go, excuse me, you're in our seats. And I'm just like, this is not our church. You don't do that to visitors. Like, his parents were longtime members there. Like, he looks just like his father and added together with his mother. Like, obviously we're their kids. Like, I just couldn't even believe it. I'm like, what? People at church are horrible, because humans are actually pretty horrible. And it still blows my mind that I've never given up on church. And so many people have, like, so many people. And I get it. Like, I know they're hypocrites, there's pedophiles, there's, cults and control freaks and, get rich quick schemes. I mean, whatever it is, there's so many bad things that happen at church. But for some reason, God just always held my heart in his hand. And I knew that all of that stuff grieves him, like just as much as it was grieving me. Way more, obviously. God has way more compassion and feelings than we do. And it just absolutely breaks his heart that his kids do this and in his name. And so the next week from the dry and dusty, you're in my seat church, we go to the Calvary Chapel where all our friends had gone to that had left that Baptist church. And so then it felt like home right away because we knew everybody. But it was challenging theologically coming from Salvation Army where like the head of the Salvation Army was a woman at the time. And now Calvary Chapel very much teaches more of a biblical model of like men and women are equally as important and created equally, but they have different roles. And like, I didn't understand that. I was just basically like a women's liber kind of person, and that did not make sense to me. And luckily, I don't know how, but somehow I was able to be teachable. And I think the real way that it worked for me to be able to change my thinking was that pastor was super good at mentoring Earl and teaching him how to he was already a really good husband and very patient, and he absolutely loved his family and laid down his life for us. But he also really pursued ministry a lot, and sometimes at the sacrifice of time with his family. And I remember always saying to him this weird thing, like, you can't go do that when you have a dirty garage. And it would just be this like litmus test for me that it was like, if you aren't going to organize the garage, then why are you serving the Lord? And I mean, it's so ridiculous because I'm sure many people have messy garages and, but there was just something in me that was somehow trying to say like, we don't quite have the balance worked out right, but I didn't know how to say it or how to communicate it. And one thing that I didn't explain about what a blessing my husband has been to me is that I came from a household where children don't have opinions. You don't have feelings. You never express them. You don't get a say. You just do what you're told and you be quiet and you never complain. I wouldn't dare. You'd never talk back. I mean, we would have got backhanded across the room. Like, you just don't do these things. So when I met him as a young adult, 19, 20-year-old, he would ask me like, well, what do you think of that? Or how do you feel about that? And I'd be like, I don't know. It used to take me like a week or something to try to figure out how I felt about something. And where this was really annoying for him was when we would have an argument and he would want to like, don't let the sun go down in your anger kind of thing and solve it and get better. And I didn't know how I even felt. And he didn't understand that he thought I was sort of playing a power trip on him by not giving him the peace of let's reconcile. And so I learned actually how to do like a fake reconciliation for him so he could sleep. And then a week later, when I really figured out how I felt, I would bring it up again and we'd talk it through. And then eventually he figured out like, oh, you're just that not in touch with how you feel about things. And so don't take it personally and give her some more grace and don't make her go through a fake reconciliation, whatever. So anyways, he's kind of the opposite of me. Like, he's so in touch with his feelings and intuitive with that, but he was so good at like drawing me out and patiently, lovingly. And then he was really the opposite of my father. Like, he was never yelling or hitting me or anything like that. So I'm so grateful that that's who God gave me as a partner in life. And he was a fabulous dad, like totally hands-on. I guess that's why God gave us twins, because then we had 4 hands and 3 kids. Yeah. And then he was also very, very radical for our generation, in a sense. When we were first married, neither of us had super good jobs. Like you can't have a job that paid well enough to put 3 kids in daycare and then you both work. Like, that just wasn't going to happen. So we just kind of looked at each other and said, well, if neither of us, like one of us wasn't a lawyer or, you know, a government job, like we're both kind of making minimum wage type of thing. So it's like, well, obviously while I'm still breastfeeding, like I'll stay home, but once they start getting older, like maybe we should just both have part-time jobs or something, and then we can both parent part-time, work part-time. I mean, at one point we even shared a job at a food bank that I worked half the time and he worked half the time. So that's really, really rare. And later on, you know, he ends up getting this career sort of self-taught in like graphic design and internet marketing and things like that. And he makes like a lot more money than I did. And I always just looked for jobs that had benefits because his jobs never did. They were self-employed. And so, you know, I worked at Starbucks half for part-time, and I could get dental for our family and, you know, just stuff like that. Yeah, sidetrack on how great my husband is. So then at this church, they're teaching us like, how do you love your family like Christ loved this church? Or how do you love your wife like Christ loves the church? And that kind of thing. And so there was a new focus on us as a family and more time for us and things like that. And the more that happened, the easier it was for me to adjust to, like, you know, more of like what you would say is, you know, the husband is the head of the house. And as much as he's the head of the house spiritually, that's financially and that's a burden actually on them. And then we're meant to be their helpers, and it's no less important, and it's just as important, and I'm not a second-class citizen, and I'm valued. And so it just like all this realigning. And it was hard because I think in my family of origin, my dad was so controlling. My mom was really a doormat, and so I really didn't want to be a doormat. And I actually remember back when we first moved to North Van, like in grade 10, when we lived in that low-income housing, and they had that bed around the bookshelves and all that, my mom actually moved into my room for a while because she told me that dad was beating her and like choking her and banging her head on the floor and stuff, and probably slipped into a rage and didn't even know what he was doing. And I said to her, oh, Mom, we got to go to like a women's shelter or something. And you got to think, back then, like, there was no debit cards. My mom had no checkbook. She had no access to money. She was like cleaning houses, and my dad was working for the highways department. And she was just like, couldn't fathom how she could survive and, you know, drag the three of us kids to some shelter and be like super poor and have no food or clothes or whatever. She's like, no, I'm just going to deal with it. So yeah, super thankful that I did not have an abusive husband or do not have. So where am I in my story? Right. Again, I miss this like huge important thing. I don't know. Maybe I have a mental block about it because I don't normally talk about this stuff. Yeah. Okay. So we're on the Sunshine Coast after Abbotsford, and we're going to that church the Baptist church, the Dusty Church. And while we're there, one of Earl's good friends is like a flirt, and he's like flirting with me. And for some reason, I encourage it and even look forward to it. Oh dear. So, well, that's dangerous. And then Earl gets this job doing like internet marketing and ends up having to work out of the house for a while doing that before he kind of goes on his own and does it as a subcontractor from home. But anyways, so while he's gone, I end up having this like MSN, I don't know, it's like brand new. The internet is very new. It's 2000, and there's instant messaging or something. And I talk to this guy, and we plan out like how to have a rendezvous. And when Earl gets home, I tell him right away. And as a kid, I was very devious and good at lying and wearing a mask and hiding all those things. But God's like, slowly healing me of all these things. And I just never could lie to my husband or hide things from him. I was always like really blatantly honest, no matter how bad it was. So I told him about it right away. And he, of course, was absolutely crushed and just like distraught, and packed up the kids and went to the ferry. And luckily someone from the church like went down there and talked him into coming home. And it was horrible. It was, so embarrassing. Lots of people found out. It was not good for that guy's marriage. And, anyways, that's a whole nother story. But that night after the kids are put in bed, we're sitting in the living room, Earl and I, and we're talking. And I just say to him, like, there's something wrong with me. Like, I feel like I have a hole in my heart or something. I'm trying to fill it with what? Affection from a guy when I already have you? Or like, I don't know what's wrong. Something actually feels wrong. And I believe the Holy Spirit told him what the answer was. And so he asked me, he said, Maria, have you ever like confessed and repented from your sexual past? And of course, like right away I said, oh yeah, of course. Cause that's like your Sunday school answer. That's what you're supposed to do. And then I just sat there with it for a minute and I said, no, actually I haven't. I always just, like, my testimony was, this is what I did. And then I stopped doing that. I never repented. I never saw that that's the thing that put Jesus on the cross. Like, that connection was not made from my head to my heart at all. So right there and then I just start crying out to the Lord and confessing, repenting. And it's really hard to explain, because when you have a physical experience, it's hard to relay that. But I can tell you that this is what happened. Something heavy flew off of my chest. And I took a breath. And I said out loud, I feel different. And I like physically felt different. It was absolutely bizarre. And of course my husband was like heartbroken, and he said, well, we'll see, because he couldn't see spiritually that some demon just flew off my chest. And I know there's lots of competing or controversial topics about that, whether you're possessed, oppressed, blah, 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 doesn't matter. All I know is something heavy lifted off of my chest and I felt it go. And then I actually felt different. And then I was different, which is so cool. Like, to give you an example, I just started like figuring out how to have boundaries. And I would even ask Earl advice on certain things. And so at the grocery store, there'd be like a restocky guy, and he would go to our church. And normally in the past, he would like touch my shoulder when he's talking or something. And so he tries to do that. And I go and shirk out of it. And he goes, what? And I'm like, oh, I just don't like it when people touch me. So just start like putting up boundaries, and so that was really cool. And then a year after that event, like we rededicated our vows, and that was it was 9.5 years, I think. 2000, yeah, August of 2000, and we were married in December of 1991. So it was like 9.5 years. No, that was August of 2001. So yeah. And so, yeah, and Earl did say, you're right, you did change that day. You were never the same again, which is so cool. And I just, would I encourage you? Man, ask the Holy Spirit, like today, tomorrow, right now, whatever, stop the video, whatever you want to do. But I encourage you, ask him, are there any unrepentant sins in my life? Like, I'd never done that. I was walking around with this like Satan's claw on me in an area that was like waiting to jump out and destroy me. And I had no idea. And after that, I actually, like the next day or something, I was like journaling and praying and whatever. And I said, okay, Lord, is there anything else that I need to repent of? And this might seem super minor, but he literally told me, you have to renounce the vow that you made that you're not a reader. And when I was a kid, I don't know what got into me. I like sports and running around and whatever, and I really didn't like reading books. And my sister loved reading books, and I really did not want to be like my sister, let's put it that way, which is, I was just whatever. There's no explanation. I was just like that. And so I made this vow, and my mom also was not a reader. And so I did really well in school because I obviously knew how to read and I know how to study, and I would do that. But I never read for self-improvement or for fun. I only read to pass a test and do well in school. And so I did this renouncing of this vow, and then I like found C.S. Lewis and like read the Narnia series and just kind of started reading like crazy, and it was really fun. And I remember saying to a friend back then, like, man, you know, why couldn't God have, you know, dealt with this stuff 10 years ago so it doesn't have to create this mess in my marriage and, you know, the other person's marriage, like all that. And he just graciously said, you know, I think if God were to change all the things that he wants to change in us at one moment, that we'd all have whiplash. And that's really stuck with me, like that it's, you know, God works on our junk as we make space for that, and as we're open to it, and as we're ready, and as we invite him. He's a gentleman. He doesn't like barge in and say like, Maria, you have this thing to deal with. Maybe he does sometimes, but with me, he didn't. And it's always when I'm asking, like I was saying to my husband, what is wrong with me? Right? Like something's wrong. And, yeah, so man, that's something we all need to do, right? Okay, God, what pet sin am I holding on to? You know, what pet idol? Oh my gosh, idols. We always think of, you know, the Israelites with their little carved idols or their little golden calf, whatever. Oh yeah, we don't have that. Oh sure, I got a phone in my pocket. I got freaking YouTube. I got like sugar. We have idols. Coffee. We all have idols, trust me. I just listed a few of mine. And they're really hard to kill. I mean, you know, I've had food issues for like my whole life. And, you know, going back to the not having enough and eating dog food and lots of candy. And I think candy and sugar, they give you some sort of dopamine high, and it like I think I was self-medicating for depression and anxiety as a kid, and I ate a ton of candy. Like, it got to the point where, while we lived at the house where the liftoff happened, and I don't know if it's before or after, or whatever, you know, things like that are blurs when it's like 20 years ago, that I remember putting my kids to bed, skipping supper, putting my kids to bed, and then eating tons of candy by being hungry because I hadn't eaten supper. So skipping meals so I could eat more candy. Like, this is a very bad habit. Yeah, and actually I went and saw a naturopath about it and told her all the things I was doing, where I was hiding candy and just like all these kinds of things. And she's like, you are completely addicted. Like, you need to get every form of sugar out of your house. And then like you need to go to counseling, like, you know, like an Al-Anon type of group, or like you know, man, can you imagine them taking me seriously? Oh, I'm addicted to sugar. Anyways, I cried because like she said it was so serious. And then I do remember getting rid of all the sugar in the house and literally laying on the floor, shaking, like crying out for sugar. So there's no joke, like it's a serious thing. Anyways, continued to dabble with that for many, many years. And after the liftoff and being different, the one thing that like wasn't fully healed for me was my own forgiveness of myself, right? I hadn't dealt with that yet. So I didn't trust myself. So I started putting on a fat suit, and I mean like 10, 12, 15 pounds a year, pushing 80 to 100 pounds extra. I kid you not, that's what I did over the next, 5 or 6 years, 7, 8 years, whatever. Absolutely put on a huge fat suit, thinking that was going to keep me from temptation in that area. Guys aren't going to flirt with me. So yeah. Then I've spent years praying for the fat suit to come off, knowing that it was this sick thing in my head, and Anyways, where are we in our story? Wow. It has come off, by the way. But yeah, so we're back at the Sunshine Coast, and Earl's in this internship program we're the youth pastors. We're learning how to, be better partners, and understanding more of the role of men and women being really equally important and equally valued and cherished, but having different roles. And that was really cool. And then Earl felt like after a few years that he wanted to, and he got ordained to be a pastor, and then like a senior pastor. And so he wanted to move to Vancouver and plant a church. And I said, I just don't want to move the kids during high school. Like, can we just finish it out here? We've moved around a lot, and I haven't even told you all the moves, but whatever. And I had moved in high school, and it sucks. And he's like, okay, well, we won't, how about you pray about it? And like, I'll wait till you're on board. And then there was like this women's conference-y thing, whatever. And I went to it, and one of the speakers was talking about David and how he was his mom's baby, and he's out protecting the sheep. And then he has to like fight off, a lion and a bear with his bare hands and protect the sheep and all that. And obviously God helps him with that. And then he has, I don't know, his brothers are fighting the Philistines, and there's this Goliath giant, and nobody wants to fight him because he's too scary. And he's like, oh, I'll do it. And because he knows that God's with him, and he swings his rocks and kills the guy. And I just felt like when this lady was talking about the story, like I felt like God said to me, Maria, you can't protect your kids. David's mother did not coddle him and protect him and say, no, you can't go out there in the field with the sheep. You might get eaten by a bear, or you can't go out to the Philistines because like that big giant might get you. It's like, you can't protect them from, kind of like their testimony. Like, you can't protect them from the big city. You can't protect them from switching schools in the middle of high school. Like, that's not your job. They're actually my kids, and I'm loaning them to you right now, but you need to trust me. So I came home and I said to Earl, yeah, okay, we can go. So in July 2010, we left the Sunshine Coast and moved to Vancouver and planted a little church, like a little Calvary Chapel there. And then now at this point, like in our kids' high school years, we'd always been their youth pastors, and now we're their senior pastors, and we go to a really small church with no other teenagers. And so Earl and I are just praying, okay, God, you got to send people into our lives. And if it's not in our church, then some other thing for them to do that will have Christian people give them the same kind of, messages that we've given them to reinforce it. Because we know that kids reach that age where they're like, I don't want to listen to my parents, and they have to choose their faith for themselves. And these years are so critical. So we're just praying, and all of a sudden, I don't know how it happened, but they got connected with a Christian camp. And our daughter goes first, and then the boys follow, and they're all working there and interning there and serving there, and and growing and meeting all these Christian friends and these other leaders that mentor them. And it was amazing. And then in the end, when they graduated, my dad gave them money for graduating high school, and they all chose to spend it on going to Bible college, which I didn't see that coming. So they went to California to Murrieta Springs, where the Calvary Chapel Bible College used to be. It's not there anymore. It kind of died during COVID, I think. But anyways, they all went there. They all met their spouses there. Our youngest, the boy twin, he met his wife there first and only did one semester, came home and said, like, I'm not going back because I got to save and to marry this girl. And so then, and she's from Manitoba. And so they got married first, and then they lived their first year of marriage in Vancouver. And then over that year, actually within the next 13 months, the other two married only children who are American. And only children don't leave their family because they're all that their parents have. And so both of them live in America. Our daughter's in Nebraska and our son is in Idaho. And then And then all of a sudden, like, we're praying, wow, Lord, we know that our youngest kid is going to move to Manitoba because you can't make a go of things in Vancouver. I mean, houses, a tear down is $1 million in 2016. And so we were living in low income housing. And so they come over and announce, yeah, so just wanted to let you know we're going to move to Manitoba. And we said, yeah, we knew that. And they're like, what do you mean you knew that? I'm like, because we know how the world works. But we've been praying this whole year, and, you know, God's said, yeah, you can move to Manitoba too, so we're going to come. And they were ecstatic. So anyways, so then we moved to Manitoba in, again, July, but it was 2016. So that church that we had done for 6 years, we passed off to another Calvary Chapel pastor, and we moved here and started another one. So we have a small little church in downtown Winnipeg. It's in a pretty sketchy neighborhood, and we're praying about, you know, if we should move to a more family-friendly neighborhood. But anyways, God definitely had us there for a purpose during COVID, that's for sure. But that's another story. Yeah, so I guess another part of my story is, while the kids were at Bible college, when we lived in Burnaby and had the church in Vancouver, and we lived in that low-income housing, my neighbor upstairs was a Christian, and I shared with her this interaction, or like kind of an argument that I had had with Earl, and she said, you know, I think you should take this course that I took that I think you'd really like, and it was called Freedom Session. And so I found it and signed up for it and went to it, and wow, like I got lots of healing from that. And I think not to like spill the beans on the course, because I think you can buy it and stuff like that, but I'll just sort of summarize what the main things that are the highlights of what I got. One of the things you had to do was write out every single bad thing that was ever done to you, how you felt about it, how you reacted to it, you know, where your status of relationship is with that person, and that kind of thing. And it's like pages for me, right? And then you have to go and write down every bad thing you've done to someone else. Well, I tell you, the amount of pages match. And then you have to go and forgive yourself for all the things that you did to those people, all those sins and lies and steals and cheats and whatever it is, right? And even make, kind of from an AA kind of point of view, like make amends if you can, but sometimes you can't. And then go through and forgive each one of the things that someone else did to you. And you don't confront them or anything like that. Like, it has nothing to do with them. This is your forgiveness. This is good for you. And wow, that was really impactful. And like I said, like, remember, I didn't really forgive myself for the past that I had walked down. And so when I did that almost affair thing, but it, you know, it was a conversation about it, so it might as well have happened, right? Like, it was in my heart. And then I start putting on the fat suit. Like, I really needed to be able to learn how to forgive myself for stuff, because that was definitely something I did not figure that out. And then the other thing that was really amazing that came out of it was watching the patterns of how I had responded every time something bad happened to me. And it's quite eye-opening when you see sort of your little, maybe we learned how to survive at 7. I'm not really sure when I learned how to survive, but I'm obviously pretty good at surviving. But this skill set is for a little kid. But now I'm like, I don't know, 40, whatever. I took it in, I think, 2014, this course, so 10 years ago. So 43, because I'm 53 now. Well, I don't need to respond to things like I'm a 7-year-old. Are you kidding me? I'm a grown-ass woman. Like, how about I respond in a much more calm way? How about I respond in a more thoughtful way? How about I don't respond and think about it? You know, like, a lot of my responses to things were based on survival as a kid. Wow. So I became a much more calm person, and it does obviously wish I had taken that course way earlier. My kids never really, the youngest one, he still lived at home, but the other two were still at college because they stayed for 4 semesters. So they never really got to live with me again to see how much I changed. And that kind of, that kind of breaks my heart. But anyways, it's never too late, right? So I think the purpose of sharing my story is to show that humans are very broken. And there's a lot of like very similar patterns that people go through, because Satan only has so many things that he can trip you up on. And so there's like reoccurring themes. But often I find in our society, we don't really talk about them. And people try to like wear a mask and say like, I'm fine. I got nothing wrong. I'm not depressed. I'm not angry. I'm not addicted to sugar. Like whatever all the things are that we don't talk about, right? And I don't know, I'm really tired of that. Like, I personally only really hang out with people that are super honest and like more vulnerable. Because people that wear masks, like, that just tires me. I just feel like I just don't really have time for that. Like, that sounds rude, but I mean, I guess I just don't trust them. I'd rather someone be willing to share their vulnerabilities and their brokenness and let me be a part of that and pray with them and things like that than people who pretend to have it all together, because no one has it all together. Like, no one. And and then in this culture that we live in that's like full of cancel culture, and if you don't believe exactly what I believe, then I'm going to cancel you, or I'm never going to talk to you again. And we certainly saw like so much division in the last few years amongst churches, families, employers, employees, like whatever, so much division, so much hate. And like all of that just breaks the Lord's heart. I mean, we're his kids. We're adopted into his family. We are siblings. He's our father. And what are we doing fighting? Why do we even have wars anymore? I can't even believe that we do. It's ridiculous. There's enough land for everyone. Anyways, that's getting political, sorry. So I don't know. My favorite channels are people that are really real, like YouTube channels. So I hope to have some really real conversations with some people I know and meet new people and be able to have conversations with them and hear about how God rescued them and how he's changed them and how he has answered prayers in their lives and turned them around 180, and my husband reminded me this morning that during our marriage counseling, like premarital counseling, the counselors asked, like, how are you guys still going to church? Like all the things that we've gone through, previously. Because when you hear pedophilia and, abusive father and cults and getting kicked out of school and church and, like how would you still be going to church? How is that possible? And it's a miracle. And I remember saying many times to God, like, why are you taking me through this? And he always said to me, because then you'll know how not to do it. And I didn't know I was going to marry a pastor. Like, so I was like, okay. So like when we were youth leaders, like neither of us were ever alone in a car with another kid. Always one of our kids or other kids had to be there. Like you never drop off a kid alone without a witness, and just so many things to be careful about, right? So, yeah. It does break my heart that so many people have given up on church because, like, The fruits of the Spirit are really things that I think can best be grown in amongst a body of believers. It's very hard to be challenged to follow the fruits of the Spirit if you're only focusing on your immediate family, because those are easy people to love. But if what you have in common with the people at church is just Jesus and his blood, then it's much more challenging because you have a diverse group of people. And so I think the challenge is to, risk. Risk getting hurt. Of course, there's crappy people at church. And then there's also beautiful people at church. And if you sit at home and you never go again and you're just consuming online, like, how is the gifts that God's given you being used in the body? They're not, because you're keeping them to yourself. You have to go and risk and use them in order to bless the body. And if you're not there, then they're kind of sitting on the shelf being wasted. So, I super encourage you to find a Bible teaching church in your area. And even though it might feel like you're trying to take a swim in a very cold lake, it actually will be worth it, and it is refreshing, even though there might be some glass on the bottom of the lake, there might be rocks, there'll be waves, like, yes, of course, this is life and these are humans, but it's like, when the Israelites sent the spies into Canaan, and one group comes back and says, oh, like, there's giants there, and it's just like, it's super scary, we're never going to make it. And then the next group of spies are like, well, yeah, there's some like challenges there, but like, it's totally worth it. We can make it into the promised land. And I think it's kind of what it is. It's like, what are you going to make of it? Are you going to go early and be like well rested and well prayed up and ready to worship and ready to hear from the Lord and ask him, like, how am I supposed to bless the people I'm sitting around? Or are you just going to stay home and, like, watch some big famous pastor online? Click. I don't know. I personally watch some famous preachers online. I do. But it's supplemental to going on Sunday and having actual relationships with real people. So that's my encouragement. And obviously, there's so much more I could say about purity culture, about confession and repenting and overeating and fat suits and, sexual sin. Like, of course, there's lots that can be said, but I think this is supposed to be my opening introduction video so that the next guest kind of gets an idea of, like, how deep I want them to go. So I probably should stop talking, because I'm sure this is enough for one video. Way too long, really. Aren't they supposed to be something like 10 minutes? Well, no. I personally like long conversations. That being said, long conversation, great YouTube video. Shawn Ryan interviewing John Burke, and he's the author of, like, a book about, like, near-death experiences. And so it's all about, like, 80% of people experience heaven and 20% experience hell. It's a 4-hour podcast, you guys, on Shawn Ryan's channel. And I've listened to it twice, and I've, like, told everybody I know, go listen to this. It's so encouraging. Oh my goodness, just to hear what heaven is like. It's going to be amazing. And I can't wait. And I want as many people as possible to be there. So if me bearing my soul and chatting with you and telling you all these horrible things that I've done can encourage, like, one person to meet Jesus, or, deal with some more stuff, because we're all on a journey, then yay, that's my goal. And I don't know, I hope I haven't offended people. I'm really not trying to. Obviously, I'm trying to glorify the Lord in what he's done in my life and how much he's changed me. And I am so grateful for that. And I'm not done yet, obviously. We won't be this side of heaven. I'm not really sure how to end this video. I didn't really think about that. I was trying to cover some major events, and covered, like, abusive childhood trauma, pedophiles, purity culture. Those are some big topics. Adultery. Wow. Overeating. I mean, there's a lot there. And It's amazing. I cannot imagine the person I would be without Jesus. I cannot. I hope you know him. And if you don't, I hope you will find him. Until next time, bye.